Y'all know I love a good book with a purpose, and Glow Rose Books is all about creating stories and journals that help kids and teens name their feelings, find their voice, and feel seen. From Goodnight My Blessing to Gary and Negative Dino, and journals like Look, I'm Mad and You Don't Need the Likes. Every page is designed to spark conversation, reflection, and growth. These books are perfect for parents, educators, and anyone who wants to help young people express themselves in healthy ways. You can grab your copies right now at glowrosebooks.com. And if you missed it, go back to season 1, episode 5 of the Black Girl Iowa podcast to hear my in-depth conversation with the author herself, Glow Rose. Trust me, you're going to want to listen. Welcome back to Black Girl Iowa, the podcast where we celebrate the stories, voices, and experiences of Black women across the state of Iowa. I'm your host, Emili, and today's guest is a true powerhouse whose journey from Dallas, Texas to the Iowa bench is nothing short of inspiring. She is the District Associate Judge of District 5, appointed in 2024, a graduate of Skyline High School, class of 2000. She went on to earn her Bachelor of Arts in Journalism from the University of Houston in 2003. Later, she earned her Juris Doctor from Thomas Jefferson School of Law in 2009. She brings a wealth of experience to the courtroom. Her legal career includes serving as a criminal defense solo practitioner, an assistant appellate defender for the state of Iowa, and a claims specialist bodily injury attorney at Nationwide Insurance. Each role has helped her shape her commitment to justice, advocacy, and community service. She is also a proud member of the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, the Iowa National Bar Association, and Polk County Women Attorneys. In 2023, she was honored with the prestigious Willie S. Glanton Award for her outstanding commitment to advocacy and community uplift. Since to practice law in both Iowa and California, she is also a devoted wife and mother of 2. She says the best part about living in Iowa is the cost of living and a quality education for her children. So, ladies, gentlemen, and non-binary friends, I'd like to welcome Judge Ashley Stewart to the show. Ashley, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yes. With many of my podcast episodes and the people that I interview, it is usually I meet you at random, I start talking, I get to know what you do, and then it's like, oh my God, that's so great. I ask a bunch of questions, then I ask you to be on my podcast. So me and Ashley actually met at a friend of mine's birthday, and I probably gabbed her ear off to the point where she was like, who is this girl? And then sent an email. And I mean, I think one of the primary things that really stuck out about us talking was you are the only Black female judge. Is it in the state of Iowa, or is it at least in our district?
It's in the state of Iowa currently. There was one before me, Judge Ramonda Belcher. She was a district associate judge too, handling juvenile matters, but she retired right before I took the bench. So then I became the only one in the whole state of Iowa.
That is incredible, considering that the state of Iowa has many districts, has many judges, has many district courts, and all those other things. And you're the only one. So I want to go ahead and jump right in. Usually I ask questions about your upbringing stuff. No. We're going to jump right in. Let's talk about representation.
Okay.
So with you being the only Black judge in the state of Iowa, a state that has a population of over 3 million people, what does that feel like? And what does that mean to you to take what you know, your experience, and now be serving in this capacity?
Well, to be honest with you, like you said, Iowa has several districts across the state, and I serve in Polk County, which is the largest district in the state. But I really don't have an opportunity to see very many judges outside of my little area. And so I don't really think about it on a day-to-day basis, being the only Black woman judge. I mostly just try to live up to the justice standards and the oath that I've taken. So I look at it that way. But I do think when I have defendants, 'cause I'm a criminal judge, when I have defendants come into the courtroom who look like me, this last year that I've been on the bench, I've had a lot of folks walk in and say, oh my God, I've never seen a Black woman judge before, or I've never seen a Black judge. And even though I'm meting out justice because they're often in a place in their life where they've made some bad decisions, I still feel that they are proud that I'm serving on the bench and that I'm a judge that's representing the interests of Iowa. And so that's when it always impacts me to realize that I'm doing this thing that I wasn't really counting on doing in my life.
Yeah, and isn't it always really interesting how I was just talking with someone about this. You think your life is gonna go one way, and then things happen. So, I wanna go back real quick and talk about how you were born and raised in Dallas, Texas,
I was.
University of Houston, journalism major, then law school, then criminal defense attorney, bodily injury attorney for a major insurance company, now judge. Do you wanna talk a little bit about what your pathway was and how you kind of thought, "Maybe I'm gonna be a journalist, I'm gonna do this thing," but now you're actually serving your community in this capacity as a judge?
Yeah, like if we go all the way back to high school, as you mentioned, when I was in high school, I wrote for the school newspaper and I started doing that actually in junior high when I worked for a community newspaper. And so once I did that, I knew that I was going to be a newspaper journalist. I was going to, at some point in my life, my career would be that I would be writing for a local newspaper. I didn't know which one. I was open to traveling around because that's what newspaper
Mhm,
people had to do.
mhm,
But that's what I was focused on. I didn't think about the law. There was no one in my family who was a lawyer. Certainly there was no one in my family who was a judge. And so my whole motivation, even when I applied to college, was to go to a good journalism school to become a journalist. And that's why I majored in journalism. But on the way in high school, I did participate in mock trial. I don't know if you've heard of mock trial, but it's when you
yes.
do like these high school students do these simulated trials. They get a case
Mhm,
book, either criminal or civil, and then you act as the lawyer and the witness. I did that in high school and it piqued my interest, but it still didn't trigger in me that I wanted to be a lawyer. I was still
mhm,
really focused on journalism. And so I went to college, majored in journalism. And when I graduated, I did all my internships in the summer at newspapers as well. And when I
mhm,
graduated, I just started applying to all of these newspapers across. And I did get accepted to one. Got a job offer. It was in Bucyrus, Ohio, because I was ready to
okay.
go to a small place to do this journalism degree. But this is probably the only time in my life that I feel like I've experienced outright blatant racism. When they found out that I was a Black woman, the job offer
Mm,
disappeared. And
mm,
so I had to make other life choices. And so I decided to work for a law firm. But I did that for 3 years and realized that maybe my what I was really supposed to do, what God meant for me to do, was to go to law school and not necessarily this journalism thing. And so that's when I did a pivot.
okay. So the pivot happened, you go to Thomas Jefferson, attain that law degree, and from what I have learned about you is that you are very community focused, and then you're also very much involved with your sorority. So how did you find time then to learn, practice law, specifically, especially criminal defense? I couldn't imagine the additional education that comes along with that, but also remain active in your local community.
Well, the first thing I can say is when I decided to go to law school, I knew it would be for criminal law. I had been watching Law and Order. I knew that was a thing. It looked really fun. And so I knew I was going to do criminal law. But my underlying basis for doing criminal law was also to help people who found themselves in tough situations and to, even at that age, know that I wanted to uphold these constitutional rights that are guaranteed to every American, no matter their race, creed, color. Everyone deserves those same constitutional safeguards.
Mhm,
And so even though, as you said, I'm very active in my community, the reason I was going to law school was also to, even though I was going to get paid to do it, it was also to be community forward and to think of the community and those around us who need that fair shot, who need help. Most of the time, the defendants that I were representing, some of them did absolutely horrible things. I represented murderers, rapists, all of that. But then I also had those that were addicted to drugs or something else had gone on in their lives to get them on the path that they were on. And I decided as a criminal defense attorney I could be empathetic, but also represent them and bring justice to whomever needed it.
with you being a criminal defense attorney, then going over to the bodily injury claims, being an appellate defender, how do you think all of these roles helped you be a judge now? And actually, do you wanna talk a little bit about kind of what that trajectory was from practicing law professionally to now being on the bench?
I'll talk about the trajectory first. So, as you mentioned in your introduction, I started law school and I graduated in 2009, but I started law school in fall of 2006. I started law school 3 years after I graduated from undergraduate school. So, I
Hmm.
often tell people who I'm talking to, the path doesn't necessarily look like going straight from your undergraduate school to law school. For some people, it does, but for you can always go. It doesn't mean that I didn't go right after undergrad. If you still have the desire, you can still always apply to law school, which is what I did.
Hmm.
And so after 3 years off, I went to law school. I did 3 years of law school, and then I graduated in nine, knowing again that I wanted to be a criminal defense attorney. So, but when I graduated in 2009 in California, the economy was at its lowest point, right? We were in a recession. And so I
Yes.
was applying for all these jobs at the public defender's offices in San Diego, which is where I was, but all the surrounding cities. I just wanted to get somewhere. Unfortunately, I did not get a job in any of those places I applied. We could talk about that later in the plot class, but I had to learn how to interview. So that's another thing.
Hmm.
But when I didn't get those jobs, I knew since I still knew I wanted to be a criminal defense attorney, I said, well, I have to make my own way. And so by default, I just opened my own practice in California where I was just representing what I call low bono clients. So they weren't indigent. Indigent means you would qualify for a public defender. So
Yeah.
these people, when they applied, they didn't qualify for a public defender, but they qualified for someone like me. I was representing what I call low bono clients, meaning they did not really have enough money. So,
Hmm.
so I would still give them a deal essentially
Hmm.
so they could have good representation. And so that's where my career kind of started. But I say that to say, the path isn't always what you imagine the path is going to be. Right.
Hmm.
I thought I would just go immediately into being a public defender with this county in California and my life would be roses. But that's not the path that happened for me. I had to create my own path and my own
Hmm.
journey. So that's the first part of what I had to do. And then about 5 years in, my husband got a job at Iowa State. I had only been to Iowa. He's from Des Moines. So I'd only been to Iowa to visit. I had never been to live. Before I met my husband, I didn't even know where Iowa was on the map. And we had one kid already. And so I just had to transition to Iowa. And I knew I still wanted to do criminal defense, but I kind of had to get in where I could, right? So I got in at Nationwide and I did that for
Hmm.
3 years. And I
Hmm.
knew that was fun, but I still got to go back to my criminal element.
Yeah.
And so then I went to the appellate defender's office, which is a little bit different from what I was doing in criminal defense before. Those folks have already been convicted of a crime and they are trying to appeal their conviction. So I was still standing on the Constitution for those folks, but it was looking a little different. And I did that for 6 years. Then I thought, I saw something come up that where you could apply for a judgeship, and I thought, I think I'm ready for that. And so I just applied. But I have to say, I never planned my career out. Like some people create a checklist. I never planned my career out and said, okay, in 10 years, I'm going to apply for a judge. I do what feels right to me in the moment and what feels like I can help the community that I'm in.
You even saying that your plan is going to always change, is always going to evolve, I think is really important. But I also want to touch on something that I feel like a lot of other women in that I've had on this podcast have said is that when something isn't necessarily coming to fruition, so when we don't get the job that we want or we can't get an in with something, we just kind of do things ourselves. And so for you to finish law school knowing where we're in an economic recession. Ask me how I know. I finished school in 2008 and I was very lucky to get a job. And it wasn't I wanted to be a journalist too, so I'm putting out these applications and it's like, yeah, Meredith Corp just they laid off 200 people 2 weeks
Hmm.
before my interview. And I'm like, can't work there, so I just need a job. But I think there's just something to be said about Black women taking the reins of their own futures and going into business for themselves, regardless of what the business is. Can I ask, when you decided to open up your own practice, was there any fear about doing that, especially knowing that, you're going to have these cases, the pay probably isn't going to be the same, but was there any type of fear or did you automatically kind of know, well, I'm gonna be getting experience. What was your thought process to open up your own business, your own practice?
I think it's twofold. I think I knew I needed to do it to get experience to lay the groundwork for my career, but I also knew that my design wasn't to be an entrepreneur. I'm so proud of the people who can do that because it takes a
Mhm.
certain type of person to do entrepreneurship. So I was nervous because I didn't know if I was going to get the right amount of clients, how I was going to pay bills. I started off not having a brick and mortar office. I just worked out of the house that I shared with my husband at the time. And then I would meet clients at, Starbucks or wherever we
Mhm.
can meet. And then, so I was nervous about how I was going to bring in money. And then all the business stuff that goes along with that, tax ID, stuff that I wasn't trained to do. I was trained to go to law school and look at the legal issues and the facts.
Yeah.
I wasn't trained to like pay taxes, to get a tax ID, to do
Yeah.
all of the things that you have to do. And over time, I became more comfortable with it because the thing I had to do was hustle. And I tell
Mm.
every graduating law student that I talk to, it's not necessarily about, you know, the grades you made in law school. That's great. And maybe that will land you a job immediately after. If you pass the bar, that's a plus, but it really is about the hustle of you getting yourself where you need to go. No one's going to do it for you. And so I think I just took that mantra early on and said, I'm going to do what I need to do because I know I want to be this lawyer.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And how long were you a solo practitioner then?
For
Because I was
5 years,
for 5 years, and that was before you moved to Iowa.
right before I moved to Iowa.
Okay, and so now that so you had mentioned from Texas in California,
Hmm.
practicing
Hmm.
law, have a family, then it's, "Hey, husband got a job at Iowa State, so we're moving." So, you had said that you had visited, but once you're here, once you're living in the state, it is a totally different vibe. What were some of your first impressions about Iowa and saying, "Okay, cool, this is going to be home?"
Well, the first thing is we moved in the November of 2014, so it was cold. Had
Yep.
never I had never experienced a winter. I had never really I mean, Dallas had mild winters. Obviously, San Diego had no winter.
Mhm,
I had never really experienced snow. So I was very nervous. And when we first moved here, we lived in Ames, but I worked in Des Moines. And
mhm.
my eldest child, actually, his daycare was in Des Moines. So I would have to drive from Ames to Des Moines in winter. I was so nervous. I know the people who were behind me were so annoyed with me because I was driving extremely slowly.
But you got there. That's
I
the
did.
point.
I got there safely. I was so nervous about it. But then one thing I noticed because my in-laws still lived here, so I was able to attach on to their community. So when we
Mm,
joined the same church that my in-laws went to, Corinthian Baptist
mhm,
Church, and I found a community there that was really embracing and uh, up to speed with my vibe. And
mhm,
then obviously you had mentioned that I'm in a sorority, and so I joined the graduate chapter here, Iota Zeta Omega, and so I niched out my folks that way. So once I started to build those communities, Iowa felt like any other home that I'd had before because anytime I moved somewhere, I sought out the communities that I knew would support me. So I always sought out my sorority chapter. And so those are some of the closest relationships I have now. So it didn't feel like aside from weather change, it didn't really
mhm.
feel like I was moving anywhere different because I found the people who would have my back.
Yeah, and I think, speaking on connectedness, Des Moines is a relatively smaller city, it's even
Mhm.
smaller Black population here, but I feel like a lot of the connectivity, it starts with the churches here. So, and when I was reading your profile and everything, and I was just like, oh, she go to Corinthian. Oh my God, that's my church too. So, my parents, my family, like they are all, within the Corinthian umbrella as well. So then my next question then is really just about living in Iowa. You had said that you really enjoy the cost of living and
Yes.
also the education that your children are going to get. So when you maybe speak to some of your family in Dallas or friends from California or other places in the country, what are like one or two things that you always want to make sure that you're telling them about living here in Iowa and the experience that you've had since 2014?
It's so funny because I joke with my friends. When I first left San Diego, they thought I was moving to Ohio. So we've sorted that out. They
Yes.
know that I'm in Iowa. But I've had a couple of friends come visit me. Like when I had my investiture a few months ago, a couple of my friends from California came. And I think once people get here, they see that it's not all cornfields, that it's a metro, especially when they get to Des Moines, they see that it's a
Yes.
metroplex, just like any other place. Some of my friends who are looking to buy homes in California are very jealous
Mm,
because my husband and I have been easily able to buy 2 homes because the
mhm,
cost of living is just more cost effective, get more
mhm,
bang for your buck.
mhm,
And then my friends in California often have to send their kids to private school because of the education system that is in a lot of the places in California. Just really, it's not that strong, some of the public education places,
mhm.
schools. And so I have not had that problem. I feel like my kids are getting very, they're both in DNPS.
Yes.
Teachers care about them. The class sizes are small, so they're getting the attention that they need. And I'm
Mhm,
able to just call and talk to a teacher if I need to and not have to go through any hoops or call and talk to a principal or show up
mhm.
to the school and have conversations. So I feel like that's a strong part. Now, I will say for my family in Dallas, my mom is here all the time. Number one, not to see me, of course, but to see her
No.
grandchildren.
Yes.
But she's here all the time. And I remember after one of her first visits, she said, aside from winter, I could actually see myself living here as well if I needed to be around you and the children. Now, in her, she doesn't come when it's real heavy winter. She hasn't been here yet for that.
Yeah.
She kind of
During the whiteout conditions.
exactly. And my dad has come several times and he loves golf, so he loves all the golf places here and he's made
Yeah.
friends with some of my sorority sisters' husbands to play golf. So I think they were all pleasantly surprised by Iowa.
Mhm. Yeah, and, I think most people are.
Mhm.
I've lived all over the country, as well. When I was living in Arizona, same. Emily, so you're from Ohio. I
Yeah.
am. I'm from Des Moines, Ohio. I used to also get Idaho quite a bit, and after a while, like, I'm just kinda like, "I'm just gonna let y'all ride this out." But, I will say that thanks to social media and then, like, when I would come home for visits, and I would, be taking photos and pictures and things like that of my city, and people are just like, "Wow, like, that's actually there's a city, you're not from a farm." And I have to remind people, I don't look like a farm girl. Not all Iowa girls look the same, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that's fantastic, and especially when you think about, the schooling and the opportunities, I've got friends that, have kids in different places, and in some of the bigger places, their kids can't even get on the basketball team, you
No, it's true.
and all of those things. How what does that mean to you then to be able to, give your kids, those options and opportunities that you might not have been able to give them had you stayed in California?
Yeah, I do think we're able to do a lot more financially for the kids as well, just because California would have been a heavy lift, a heavy load for 2 children
Mhm,
living in San Diego, which is one of the most expensive cities in the country.
mhm,
I do think we can give them they get more freedom. Like if we had still lived in San Diego, I can't even have said that we would have been in a house. We might have been in an apartment. There would have been no
mhm,
front yard, no backyard. My
yeah,
kids have a front yard, a backyard. They play with the kids in the neighborhood. We have a bunch of kids in our neighborhood. So I just think that they're probably getting that middle of the country experience that people talk about but cannot quantify.
mhm.
And if you've never been here, then you don't realize that is it's an amazing part of living in the heartland of our country and in the middle of our country, and specifically Iowa. And we're making sure our kids are getting the foundation that they need. Sometimes you can only get in the heartland too, right? And so I think it makes me proud that my husband and I made this decision, not knowing what we would get from it when we moved here. I mean, he knew a little bit, but even then, he was raised you know, he started here 40 years ago or so. And so I think we're both excited by the future that we're giving our kids being in Iowa. And I think when I talk about that with people, they're surprised that that's happening for my kids. But I'm really excited about that. And then, one more thing about Iowa. If I still had been living in California, I'm not sure I would have the career that I currently have as well because there are more people there, it's more competitive. I'm not saying I wouldn't have risen to the top with my qualifications because you never know, but it would have been a tougher uphill battle, I think, just by virtue of living in a smaller state. I was more easily visible, more easily seen, and my qualifications were able to stand out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think too, with you, your qualifications, your experience, all of that standing out, the opportunities were definitely there. But, I would think that that would also give you some time to really think about the responsibility that you hold as a judge. So, what do you see as your biggest responsibility with being on that bench, with going to the court every day, and with seeing these people, regardless of what it is that they're being tried for, they're seeing you for? What do you think some of your biggest responsibilities are as you're upholding this Constitution?
Yeah. I think my first responsibility, and I think a responsibility of any judge, is to make sure that you're exacting justice on everyone you're seeing and for everyone you're seeing, and doing that in a fair and equitable way, because that's what our Constitution demands that we do. And so I think any judge, and that's part of every judge's oath, that's the first reason that you're on the bench. I think the second reason is for me to be an ambassador of our courthouse to those who are in Iowa, because I'm serving the people of Iowa, whether they are someone who is, you know, the state is prosecuting that case on behalf of this victim, or whether it's the defendant on the other side. I represent every facet of every person who is in the state of Iowa. And so when they come into my courtroom, I want to make sure that they feel as though they are being heard, um, and they feel as though, even for, let's say, a defendant, I'm sentencing them. Last week I had to sentence someone to 30 years. I'm sure he was unhappy about it, but because who wants to go to prison for that long? But I hope in the end he would say, I got to be heard. I felt like it was fair. She weighed both sides of the situation before she exacted a sentence. And so I think those are my first two goals, and my first, that's what my job requires me to do. And then the last thing, and I love doing it, is I'm often out in the community talking to high school students, talking to college students, talking to law students, letting them, being a representation of the bench in the community that way as well. So everyone knows the judge who, I know who that judge is. I know what she looks like. I know what she stands for, even if I never have to go into her courtroom.
Hmm.
I have faith in what she's doing because she's out here letting us know what's happening in the courthouse.
I love that you are taking your experience and your knowledge, not only leveraging it in the courthouse, but also giving back to those other students. So, as you are doing all of these things and you are talking with the students, what is some advice that you give them about the path? So, I just finished my master's degree and it almost
Congratulations.
thank you. But it almost killed me. There were plenty of days where I would call one of my friends. I'd be like, "Hey, did you tell me to do this? Because it's kind of rude and I'm drowning." But, you know, I did have people in my corner that were, cheering me on. And then I also had a host of mentors that really let me know what the gravity of what it was that I was doing and getting that additional degree. So as you're talking with these students, specifically even Black women that are considering degrees in law or they're in law school or they're looking at different things for public service, what's a piece of advice that you have for them that you wish someone would have given you on your path?
I would say if I'm talking to, it depends on who I'm talking to, but I recently talked with some high school students, and I first told them, you know, don't don't make it so rigid that you're saying that this is the absolute path that I have to follow. You're in high school, let life happen. Go to college, have a great time in college, decide what you want to do then. If you really, really, really want to go to law school, that's what I tell people too. Law school has to be a path. You have to want to go, you have to want to be a lawyer, because law school is too expensive not to want to be a lawyer at the end of it. And so
Absolutely.
if that's the passion that you have, then, apply to law school and also have fun in law school, but focus on what it is that you want to do. Start setting some goals for yourself and achieving those goals, even though life might not go the way you plan it. If you have goals set out, I do think it'll help navigate your life the way you want it to
Hmm.
go in some respects. And then, if I'm talking to Black women who are in law school or who are wanting to go to law school, the law school I went to was not a top tier law school. It wasn't in the top, 50%. It just
Hmm.
wasn't. But I knew I wanted to go to law school. And so I went to that law school and then I hustled. I tell all Black women, just go to law school if that's where you want to go. You know, it doesn't matter which one. I mean, in the end, obviously, if you go to Yale, you might get some perks that I didn't get because I went to Thomas Jefferson. But it doesn't really matter which one. What matters is what you have set for yourself. What matters is your own internal hustle. What matters is ignoring what everyone else is saying and going for what you want, and then aligning yourself in the best way possible. Get yourself a mentor. You know, go shadow as many lawyers as you can, judges as you can. Set yourself up for success, because other people, some of your counterparts, don't have to work as hard and do as much as you have to do. So you want to make sure that you're aligning yourself with your goals and with people who can support you, because we do need more Black women lawyers. And it's not even about the color or or about the gender. What it's about is having more people in our profession who come from different walks of life
Hmm.
that can represent people from different walks of life.
Hmm.
So, I'm not saying we need, you know, exclusively Black women lawyers. It's not what I'm saying. But I do think our profession works better if we have someone from all the backgrounds. And Black women lawyers only make up 2% of all lawyers. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, that was kind of murky and all over the place, but
No,
I think that's what I would say.
that was perfect. We definitely should want and strive and encourage a society that is representation in various different fields that's representative of what our society looks like. So, definitely encouraging more Black women, Black people to study law and then also giving back to their communities, I think is a very important thing to promote,
And look,
and
I would
even go ahead.
I would also say apply for the jobs, right? I was the only, to my knowledge, every time this judgeship came up, I was the only Black woman applying for this job. Um, and also the most of the time the only Black person. I think one time I was not the only Black person, but we often need to apply for the jobs too, right? Sometimes Black women especially, we will look at all the qualifications and say, oh, I have 9 out of 10, and since I don't have that 10th one, I'm not going to apply. We don't need to do that to ourselves. Just apply. The worst someone can tell you is no. I've been told no multiple times. It doesn't end, it doesn't shatter the world. You're disappointed, but we get back up and we keep moving and then we apply again. So I would say, I was the only one who applied for a judgeship. It might not be a judgeship for anyone else. It might be some other place that you think that maybe you're underqualified for. But I would still apply, get your name out there because you never know what could happen.
That is a piece of advice that I think is so invaluable. Even with my current position, I have no teaching experience. None. But I know I wanna teach as I go into my next identified career path that I really think I could be successful at. And it wasn't that I don't have the experience in teaching, it was that I did have corporate experience. I do
Hmm.
have experience in higher education and in different career paths. So, I think that, thank you for saying that on this podcast because that is such an important thing to where, you know, we wanna be perfect and we wanna check every box, but sometimes 3 out of 5 is good because those other
Sometimes
2 can be that on the job training.
look,
So,
no applicant has all of the 5 things, right?
yes.
No applicant, there's not one, because there's no such thing as someone who is 100% perfect for a job. Are
Mhm.
things there are, you look at things that make you perfect, but it's not always qualifications. It's always not quantitative, and so or qualitative. And so you think you might think that you don't fit, but you do. And so I think that's one thing that I would tell anyone who's applying
Yeah,
for any
for
job,
sure.
any Black woman who's applying for a job.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, as we wrap up the interview, I do have one more question for you, and you had mentioned that when you, were appointed, um, being a judge, there was another Black woman that was retiring from being a judge. So, and I don't wanna kind of, like, put you in a hole and say, "You're gonna be a judge for the next 30 years," even though I would love for you to be a judge for the next 30 years. But thinking about your legacy, not only as a judge, but as a woman, a mother, and your community member, what's something that you want your legacy to say about you and your experience and that you want people to remember?
I certainly want people to remember, and I'm probably going to sound like a broken record saying this, but I certainly want people to remember that I upheld the Constitution and did everything that a judge is supposed to do. But when it comes to paying forward, Judge Belcher, and I mentioned her at the top of our interview, I could call and reach out to her and chat with her whenever I needed to because she was the only Black woman judge in Iowa by herself for over 20 years. I mean, well, 14 years, but she had practiced before that as well. And so she made herself very available to chat with me and to answer questions. But aside from that, to also be my friend because she's the only person who could wholeheartedly identify with what I was going through. And I want to be that bridge for anyone else who finds themselves in the same position that I was in, applying for this job and wanting some advice, or not even applying for the job, just being a Black woman attorney who sees someone who was out there doing it before. that's why I try to make myself available to law students who want to chat with me. I make myself available to Black women attorneys who want to chat with me, just because I share their lived experience in a lot of ways. And so if we share lived in experiences, then they can feel comfortable talking to me, maybe about things they might not be able to talk to with another mentor about. With that being said, I don't just tell any woman, any law student to have one mentor. You should have multiple
Multiple, yeah.
that come from different walks of life and can give you different um, whatever you need to talk about, give that back to you, give you different advice. That's what I'm trying to get out.
Mhm.
But certainly, um, I share something that probably other folks wouldn't share with them, and so I try to make myself available in that way. And so I hope, unless not as long as it took Judge Belcher, but I do hope another Black woman applies for a judgeship and finds herself in the same position I am, being appointed, um, and can look back and say, Judge Stewart laid the groundwork for me, just like
Mhm.
Judge Belcher laid the groundwork for Judge Stewart. So hopefully I can continue to do that, and I'll continue to be an ambassador for the bench in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. An ambassador and paying it forward. I absolutely love that. Well, Judge Stewart, thank you so much for joining me today. This was an incredible conversation about your journey, and you shared everything with such honesty and heart, and I really really appreciate that. To my listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Black Girl Iowa podcast. If this conversation inspired you, moved you, or made you think a little bit deeper, please don't forget to just subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who you think needs to hear it. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Black Girl Iowa. Also, check out my blog and website, www.blackgirliowa.com. And again, don't forget, this podcast is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and YouTube. Until next time, keep showing up, keep speaking truth, and keep building the world you want to see. So let me ask you this. When was the last time you took a moment just for yourself? Not for work, not for school, not for family, but for you. That's where journaling comes in, and that's exactly why I created my journaling kits. Each kit is designed to make it super easy and honestly really fun to start your journaling journey. You'll get a decorated journal with over 100 prompts to spark your creativity, plus washi tape, stickers, cards, and even a sweet treat to keep you inspired. Journaling is more than just writing. It's self-care, it's reflection, it's dreaming bigger. And with these kits, you don't have to stare at a blank page wondering where to start. I've got you covered with prompts that will help you reflect, plan, and grow. They're just $18, and you can grab yours today on Etsy in the Black Girl Iowa shop. Don't wait to start your journaling journey. Your thoughts, your dreams, your story, they deserve a page.